We can, if I remember. Oh, did you already hit record, Mike?
Yep, just hit it.
Oh, awesome. Okay, thank you.
I got you.
Thank you very much. All right, well, thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm gonna go through and click mute on a couple people just so there's not too much background noise to distract us. So today we're going to be talking about sanitation and biofungicides and ways to reduce the fungicide burden and what to do in a post-Captan world. So I feel like we've been having this conversation for a long time, but there's still no like silver bullet. So we're gonna keep having it probably for the next foreseeable future. We have two experts in the room today. We have Srdjan Acimovic and Kari Peter. And I guess maybe if you guys could start off just by providing a little context of what you're seeing in your day-to-day work and kind of guide the conversation, and then we'll open it up for questions. So if I guess if you want to start, Srdjan.
Sure. I was going to go and give Carrie opportunity to go first because of seniority, but is that okay, Carrie?
Oh, that's fine. Go right
Okay.
ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, so my neck of the woods here is full of issues with fire blight and apple bitter rot, and that's what I have been working on in the last 5 years plus. And so the biggest issues that we currently have is the fear of resistance that potentially single-site fungicides could cause in the population of Coleoptracum species that cause apple bitter rot. And primarily, it's the group 11 or QOI fungicides that are the ones that are highly effective still for control of bitter rot, and we would like them to stay that way. So we have been like really intensely looking for alternatives, something that can, be incorporated in the summer spray programs against this disease, and have focused on trying to find different SDHI fungicides. We tested a bunch of them in the past, but then in the last 3 years, there has been also a big push from the growers to figure out what are the other alternatives that are more softer, like some of the fungicides that or the, I don't know, plant resistance activators or fertilizers that could be used to still, reduce the fungicide load overall in the spray program. And, we have been mildly successful in getting some of these materials out. Well, some of them tested, and we have really good results with few of them. When we have a dry year with less frequency of rain events overall during summer, and then when we have a wet year, some of the efficacy fails for these materials. So for me today, I'm my it's this is a difficult task what you asked us to do today to talk about potential options that can replace or get ourselves prepared not to have mancozeb and Captan. It's going to be really tough, down the road to have that. But some of these materials we just started testing. We haven't had enough time to test the mixes with these materials that we found have some efficacy. And so I guess in the future, that's something that has to be looked at.
Okay. This is Kari Peter. I'm from Penn State. For those of you who may not know me. So as far as my perspective on the whole topic of replacing the conventional broad spectrum fungicides, Captan and Mancozeb. So as I was sitting here trying to figure out a way to frame my thoughts, I think it's more like we try to jump into the deep end and expect to swim right away. And when you swim, you start out in the shallow end, then you gradually work your way. And the way as far as using that analogy, and as far as looking at replacing the broad spectrums like Captain and Mancozeb, what I've been doing is I've been looking at how to reduce first. How can we reduce the amount of Captan and the amount of Mancozeb, and really the amount of synthetics in general out in the orchard? Because this is the public demands it. This is a good selling point for commercial growers. And in my experience, Pennsylvania is a battleground for disease conditions. We get everything, and then we get a few new things to throw in there. We sometimes can mimic the Northeast as far as environmental patterns, and then sometimes we can mimic what like Srdjan has in Northern Virginia or even North Carolina or in the South. So we really are a battleground location. And what I've noticed is that as of right now, I have yet to identify any alternative product that can safely substitute and effectively substitute conventional in our region, for our region under our conditions. However, you can get them to work if you decrease the disease pressure somehow. So you can decrease the disease pressure in a few ways. Timing, when the disease pressure isn't extreme, or you decrease the pathogen load somehow. So we're right now, as far as this gradual entrance into the deep end, is where I see really the most effective use of these alternatives is how can we rotate products into a conventional system. And I think Carrot Cox, so I know could be here today. I know he's looked at this. I've looked at this a long time. So over the last few years, when I've worked with companies looking at alternative products, I say to them, okay, we can look at it all season to see what it does, if it does anything, but let's look at it in a rotational program because I think that's where we will see the most benefits. And and there is a buzzword for this. We call this ecological management. And so this is like an it thing these days, but like growers have been doing ecological management for forever. It's following disease models, it's sanitation, it's doing all different types of things. But this is definitely a tool as far as fungicide resistance management tool, as Srdjan had alluded to with these fungicides, these single modes of actions, but also in a way of just decreasing the amount of synthetics that are out there. And right now, I know we need to be thinking about a post-Captan, post-Mancozeb world, but I think we need to see how can we get these products to work just to begin with. Just let's just get the baseline activity of these products. I have looked at options with regards to substituting for Mancozeb or for Captan, and I've yet to find something that is suitable. But I think there's a lot of promising options out there for rotational programs. I still think there needs to be definitely work done looking at it under different conditions and different disease mechanisms or disease pressures as well. But I also think that going back to the topic of ecological management, we need to look at the whole system when we're thinking about replacing Captan and Mancozeb. It's just not replacing chemicals. We need to look at sanitation, resistant cultivars, the whole regenerative soil wave that's going right now, regenerative agriculture. I mean, we need to be thinking about all of those things as far as we move forward into this, very potential reality. So yeah, but that's my thoughts on the topic. It is a heavy topic for pathologists, especially those in the East. But I think it can get overwhelming, and I think we just need to kind of back up and look at where can we lessen? I think maybe we should start with that conversation first, as opposed to let's remove it altogether. I think because we didn't get that option with when it came to removing streptomycin from the organic options back in the days. It was about 10 years ago. Organic, it was approved to use streptomycin, and then in 2014 they nixed it. So basically, it was without any strep alternative that was equivalent. So we don't want that to happen. We want to be prepared, but I think we have to do it incrementally. I think to really to not get discouraged and to remain optimistic that there will be tools available when this time comes.
So follow up, I guess, question on that would be coming at it from an entomologist background standpoint. I'd then be asking, like, what's the threshold? So if we're trying to sometimes use some of these softer products, sometimes use some of the more traditional broad spectrum, like is there anything resembling a threshold that we would know that a grower could use to decide, okay, now we pull out our big guns and, we have enough bitter rot in the orchard. We need to get out there
What's
with the captain.
threshold? As far as I know, it's
Yeah, I'm
zero for
sorry.
most diseases,
No, 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 but I'm saying
Yeah.
like how would a grower, or is it just every single year they're going to be rotating through a little bit of Captan, a little bit of some biofungicide? How would you work with a grower to develop that
I think so.
softer program?
So I usually try to come up when I'm working with consultants, let's come up with a game plan for worst case scenario. And then let's work backwards. Okay, if it's not worst case, let's do what would be a moderate case because most years for us in Pennsylvania are, I'd say moderate. Last year was extreme on all accounts because it rained for 3 straight months. Um, so I would say it's something where it's you really, really paying attention to the weather and paying attention to the models. And especially for bitter rot, I know there's, Srdjan and Scott and folks at Rutgers are trying to really optimize this bitter rot model. And if we're really able to drill down into the timing, I think that will really reduce um, and that's for any model as far as really reduce the amount of what you have to put out there. So if it's not a bitter rot time period, and maybe you don't have a high incidence of other summer diseases, maybe you could get away with putting something softer during that time frame. But I think it'll all come down to, really paying attention to models that are being developed in order to adequately use these products.
Yeah,
Ellen Srdjan, do you have 2 cents to add?
sure. Yeah, I was going to say I am a big believer in pushing growers to look at the long range weather forecast, even though they might not be always true. But it gives you I would say a chance of 50-50 figuring out whether you're going to have a dry or like as Kari said, moderate or more drier year, or we're going to have a wet year because for us in Virginia here, we either seem to have one or the other, So we have had 2 years in a row with drought in the Northern Virginia, but then again, at the same time, some of the people in Central Virginia said we had, a rainy year. So, so I'm a big believer in looking at the long range weather forecast, and I'm a big believer in using the models because we started this idea that the models would be the closest that can get us to what you guys have in entomology as thresholds. And so we don't really have we can't tolerate certain level of disease so that it doesn't get out of hand because this is a microorganism, completely different microbiology, completely different biology and cycle. We have billions and billions of spores and bacteria that exponentially increase. And so things easily get out of hand. So we don't have thresholds. So for bitter rot, yeah, we are working on trying to validate whether the models that have been developed for glomerular leaf spot, so which is the leaf form of the apple bitter rot disease, we are looking at these models for the leaf form disease, whether they are fitting the bill to also give us a prediction for infection on the fruit. And and so Dave Rosenberger, like 10 years ago, told me that, usually in our spray programs, we always have one, elephant in the room that kind of shapes the spray program for the whole season. Early in the spring, for us, it is apple scab, and for most of Eastern New York. But then come, petal fall, and 10 days after petal fall, when the first cover starts, we are starting to pivot and think about bitter rot, at least in Virginia, because it is the elephant in the room for us for control of the summer rots. And then everything else that we want to control, like Marsonina, as Kari mentioned, like Sudibulch and fly speck, they kind of fall into fold there as a secondary things that we want to manage. So besides the fact that the long range weather forecast can indicate you whether you have a dry or wet year, I would say that if you do have a wet year and if you have high frequency of rain events and a huge amount of rain for each rain event, or cumulatively 2 inch or more almost every second week, then the growers need to up their game. They have to use, very effective single-site fungicides in the mixture with these other materials that are multi-site fungicides. And I think models would warrant that. Models would confirm whether what they have seen as long-range forecast, whether that really actually happens on the ground. And and the timing is the other part of it. As Kari mentioned, the most important thing is when you have a year that is with frequent amount of rain events, you can't no longer use the 2 inches or 14 days of 14 days or 2 inches of rain, whichever comes first. It becomes very difficult. And Sarah Villani from North Carolina State, she has that issue down in North Carolina, where basically what she tells me is that they have dew events that are leaf wetness events that continue through midday. And so in those conditions, you have to reduce the spray interval. And it's getting that is a message that is hard to get across to the growers. Okay, but one thing that we started doing recently is we tell the growers that their cover sprays, if they are doing alternate orbital applications, that during the high infection risk pressures, they should reduce the spray interval to from 14 days to 10 days. And then if they are not doing that, we always recommend to do every second cover complete. So it's very difficult to change the old ways, but people come back to us arguing we don't have enough. We can't get across the whole orchard in the same time, in a very short amount of time. So I try to advocate if they can buy another sprayer, try to increase their capacity to do it faster. And so because what I'm seeing as an issue is these abrupt, and as Kari mentioned, 3 months of rain, changes that we hardly have seen before. And these are happening almost every second year in Virginia. And so when you have those high infection pressure, risk months and years, you have to use really the most effective materials. And in those cases, the frequency of application has to change. And the models can actually help, you do that. And so it's very difficult sometimes to kind of persuade the growers to use the model. I have sometimes had the best growers try to use the apple scab model from Rimpro, which is the best model that is currently on the market in terms of like predicting the infections. And so they tried a couple of years, and they just go back and default to applying every 7 to 10 days, their applications. So it becomes more like a brain practice to do it, and they still have issues with scab if they default to their classical calendar-based spraying. So I think that we need to do a better job as pathologists and also extension specialists, all of us, to I advocate people to, hey, to tell them that there is this big driver of the spray program, such as apple scab or bitter rot in the late part of the season, and at least use the models for those, and then build from there.
So,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, so Srdjan brought up a few points, sort of unwittingly, that I wanted to sort of emphasize when it comes to the efficacy of whatever you spray, whatever chemical it is, and whatever really, for a few key diseases. Number one, for your spray to be effective, it's got to get on the tree, and your sprayer better be calibrated. So for the consultants in the audience, and also the extension folks who work with growers, sprayer calibration, I cannot emphasize that enough, is when I see issues, a lot of it is human error driven. When it's fungicide failure, it's not related to the fungicide, it is human error. So and also growers get complacent. That's the only way for me to describe it when we have high density systems and they think they can spray 4 rows at a time at certain times of the season. So when there are problems, I think that's one thing that needs to be scrutinized very carefully is how people are spraying, how effective is the equipment that they're using to spray. Are they using enough water? Are they getting good coverage? Are their nozzles all working correctly? Are they reaching the top of the tree? So that's one thing. The other thing is that treating all diseases alike, where, okay, we have a wedding event, we can come in, spray something, and it's going to fix the problem. That's not the case with bitter rot because we have some diseases that have a significant dormant period once they penetrate and then cause that initial infection, there's no symptoms and they go to sleep. You need to make sure with bitter rot especially that fungicide's on prior to that infection event. You cannot bank on kickback activities or kickback activity from fungicides to be able to wipe out that infection because fungicides only work on actively growing organisms. So this is why we can get away with kickback activity with apple scab or even powdery mildew is that once they start causing infection, they're just going. And, it's they'll go, go, go. And then if you have a fungicide come in within 48 hours or even 72 maybe, it can stop it in its tracks. We don't know for certain, but I don't think we have the same luxury with bitter rot. So, and this is something that I've really harped on with the growers who've struggled is just the basic epidemiology of some of these pathogens is that you can't treat them all alike. And it doesn't matter what chemical you're using, whether it's an organic chemical or a conventional chemical. The principles are all the same. So really understanding the basic biology, epidemiology, and also the efficacy of your equipment. So I just wanted to emphasize like those two things as we're moving forward because this is going to play a role. And I don't know if I haven't been able to attend prior ones of these events. So I'm not sure if this has been mentioned, but it is a drum worth beating over and over again.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Calibration is important. I think we don't always, well, we don't have enough specialists in it is part of it, from my perspective. So, but yeah, that's great. I also noticed Kathleen put something in the chat. I don't know, do you want to just unmute and say this yourself, Kathleen, or do you want me to read it out?
Yeah, that's fine. I can almost talk. I talked for 3 hours last night, and I'm.
For now.
But yeah, it just you're talking about economic threshold levels made me think of the fact that when Bill McCarty first presented the potential ascospore dose for assessing the level of apple scab, where you sort of had to do your first couple of spray applications, was about the closest thing we're ever going to see in plant pathology to an economic threshold level. And I just wondered if that was something that was realistic for any other pathogen or even for scab itself, because I don't think we've really delved that much into using it because it's kind of complicated. And, like even as a consultant, if I'm going to do it for people, it's going to be an extra thing that they're going to have me do additionally. And most people feel like, well, I got a good sense of where the inoculum is to begin with. And I think also some people kind of misinterpreted it early on as meaning that, if you have a, 0 potential ascospore dose level, then you don't have to spray at all. And Bill never said that, I don't think.
Yeah, that's a tricky business, in general. I'll tell you that this whole idea of McCarty's ascospore dose, that was modernized by Mark Trapman and the apple scab group from Europe. And they basically incorporated all those inside of the RIMPRO apple scab model. And basically, RIM means relative infection measure. And so what they did is they have done a lot of validation to prove that if you have RIM values of 100 and below, when you have these basically rain events that just allow the ascospores, that just allow 1% of ascospores to be released, that those are of not economic significance to be managed, and you can easily either skip it if you didn't have scab last year, or if you do have that rain event with 100 RIM value, if you had scab, scab visible on trees in the previous year, they would recommend only applying contact fungicide, such as mancozeb or something like that. But then they have the RIM infection value of 300 and above, in which they basically say that at that point, 3% of ascospores that are released in the air at a certain rain event, that in those cases, any of the growers who have had scab last year or did not have scab last year. It doesn't matter. You should spray because of those are of economic significance. And so a lot of that research is published right now, and some of it, is still being published from this model. But it has been very well validated in both the European continental conditions as well as other parts of the world as well. And I have used it for the last 10 years, the RimPro, and it really does do a good job, giving us the ability to see how severe the infection period is going to be. And that's something that the NUA model does not have the ability to. It just gives us a 0 or 1. Yes, there is infection risk, or no, there is not infection risk. And it does show also the model in NUA, to be fair, it gives us the ability to show how much ascospores are being released. However, the model that is by Jones and Gaduri, which is in the NUA model, does not have the ability to see or predict the destiny of those spores that are released. That's where the RimPro really excels. It actually follows groups of ascospores that are released per hour, and it gives the prediction what is their destiny. Are they successful infecting or not? And it gives the viewer of the model the severity of that infection, either looking at the weather forecast, so what's it going to be, or looking at historically, what really actually happened on the ground and how severe the infection was. And so, with that relative infection measure, you can decide to apply fungicides that are either contact or mixed contact and systemic single-site fungicides, depending on that severity that you can see in the RimPro.
Cool. That yeah, that's great. That, I guess, part of my original question was, I know Carrick sometimes will give presentations looking with fire blight, where he'll use the models and say you need to go in with the big guns, or you can get away with the
Yes.
biofungicide based on what the new model is clicking out. I've never been in RimPro, so that's interesting to know that there's a little bit more nuance like that with the scab model also
Yeah.
in RimPro.
And there's enough
That's
knowledge
super
to say
helpful.
that you can rely on it, so far.
Yeah, I have to say I haven't used RimPro well, and I wasn't aware of that kind of level of more concern, less concern, because my limited usage of it is it always seems to exaggerate the early infections, and maybe we're not inputting the information
Yeah,
correctly.
that depends, Kathleen, on the biofix you use, because there's two biofixes you can use. And I've done some calibration of the model using both biofixes or just one, with the green tip at 50%. And the model functions extremely correctly when you have the biofix of ascospore, the date of the first ascospore releases, along with the green tip date at 50%. So date of green tip at 50%, floral buds at green tip. If you have all of those both incorporated, so basically you would have to have a specialist service providing you, and Mike and I and Anna Wallace, we have been working when I was at Cornell to provide that information to the growers. When you have both biofixes implemented, the dates in the model, it really works well. But in the case that you don't have the specialist service, you can use just one biofix, and that is the green tip on your earliest, most susceptible cultivar to scab. So basically, when you reach 50% buds at green tip, it is accurate in 70% of the cases. So that means that RimPro has looked at 100 years of data in the past from multiple different locations. And that means the data that is, in the last 30 years, they collected from multiple different locations, and they took a sample and they said that green tip on your earliest cultivar is a good biofix for 70% of the cases. So sometimes you might have, in those 30% of years, you might have a little bit of overestimation, but it's really good, overall, I think, even if you use one biofix.
I should have said earlier, but you guys can all feel free. I think you all know in this group that you can always feel free to put questions in the chat or just unmute yourself and turn it into a conversation. But short of anybody else, I I was wondering if we could maybe pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about sanitation as sort of like a preamble to being able to include some of these biofungicides, or maybe taking a little bit of pressure off of the multi-sites. Um, I don't know if either of you wants to go first on this.
So sanitation as like in lieu of urea, is that what you're saying? Or is that what you're asking? Or
Um, Well, so one, urea being one question, I know that every single year I tell the growers, get out there with your urea sprays, do some flail mowing, and I honestly don't think anybody ever does. That's at least my growers. I don't know if anybody else has a different experience with that, but just sort of in general, like you both sort of mentioned early on that one of the keys to being able to take the pressure off of the Captans and the Mancozebs is to come in with really low pressure. And so
yeah.
anything sort of like talking around all of those different practices, which ones are the most grower friendly, like in a world where nobody ever sprays urea, no
Well,
matter how many times I tell them to, what else can they do that they're more likely to do?
in the case of bitter rot, so my former student, Philip Martin, who worked on this, he was curious about like what is the effect of bitter rot infected apples when you drop them to the ground, whether it's in herbicide strips, in the grassy row middles, in, say, even in an area that is undisturbed. Like he tested three different areas as far as, how long do we need to be worrying about these bitter rot infected apples that fall to the ground? And what he showed in his work is that very quickly the yeasts take over. And so the bitter rot spores become very non-existent very quickly. So one thing that's easy for growers is that when they're picking, they see rotten fruit, they need to drop it to the ground. And I would say even fruit that isn't going to make it into the picking bag, you should still drop all the fruit to the ground just to let the natural decay happen. And I think that is, it's easy. I think, and it's doable. And it was very consistent in all the three areas, whether it was in a grass, in dirt, or whatever. The yeast took over very quickly. So I think if we just encourage growers, as they're picking, or if they say before the pick and they're just scouting their orchards, they see rotten fruit, drop those fruit to the ground. And that is one way we can kind of get that inoculum out of the canopy that will be wreaking havoc. So because, it's just not mummified fruit. Those spores are stealthy. They're way smarter than us. So they're going to find cracks and crevices to sort of hang out in, even in the off season. So, but mummified fruit are definitely a nice repository for spores season to season. So if we just get those old fruit out of the tree, I think that is a step in the right direction. So I think that is something that should be encouraged. Now, with that said, say that there are years, this is something that I think probably more research needs to be done, is that say in some years where for whatever reason, you aren't going to be picking the fruit off that tree. There was a bad hail event, and you're like, I'm just writing this off. I'm collecting the insurance money. Or say that there was incomplete thinning. So you've got a lot of fruitlets that are hanging that didn't fall off. So the question is, how do we get rid of those fruit? And so I don't have an easy question or easy answer for. I do know that one year for us at Penn State, one of my orchards, it just did not get thinned. So I had a ton of little fruitlets on these trees that were sizable. They weren't tiny. They were like the size of a golf ball. So we sprayed ethereal to kind of drop the fruit. So, but research needs to be done officially to make that recommendation, as far as looking at some of these hormones to help loosen the fruit to get them off the tree. Because that's really the end goal here is let's get that fruit out of the tree so they don't mummify. So, but that, physically is really the only thing we can do right now until the ag engineers can develop a tool that knocks off fruitlets or mummies during the winter. I've talked to our ag engineer about them. He's not really keen on picking up that mantle, but I feel like we should have some kind of easy tool that removes mummified fruit or fruitlets from the trees. But that's one thing. Sanitation wise, I think that's a doable thing.
if I can add something, I've read through a lot of papers that deal with the primary inoculum, at least sources, in terms of like some mild level of investigation. So it's not easy to do that research. So if you are in Brazil, where glomerular spot is like one of the biggest issues they have and causes defoliation, what they have shown there is that the pathogen survives very successfully under the bud scales of the buds that are formed this year for the next. And so some of the researchers try to use copper or calcium polysulfide to try to treat these internal infections. And they have seen some effect on reducing the colony forming units, reducing the amount of spores that really can successfully survive. But it was not 100% effective. And basically, they came up to a conclusion that a minimal amount of inoculum can restart the disease no problem. So, the inoculum reduction for the primary sources, it is not a silver bullet. It's going to help you. But, even if you look at the data for apple scab, the ascospore dose at best was reduced by 50%. But the pathogen still has enough in the leaf litter that overwinters to allow the restart of the infection. And so what I basically try to convey as a message to the growers is if they use urea, it's one type of insurance they have that is going to increase the efficacy of their fungicides. It's going to basically secure that those fungicides are effective. Jenna Beckerman, about 5 years ago, had a good discussion through the Great Lakes Fruit Workers Group. And she actually mentioned that she has a grower who does excellent sanitation, and he's not only removing leaves for scab, he's removing any fallen fruit as well as the mummies during pruning. So he basically does not have much issues with bitter rot. And I think on a small orchard scale, the sanitation can be very effective, and it can sometimes lead growers to believe they don't have that disease there. I have growers who come and tell me I don't see scab because I sprayed for it, but I don't see it. But then again, their neighbor, who's maybe 20 miles down the road, he does have scab. And so basically, what I'm trying to say with this is that the sanitation can definitely be a good practice that you should integrate into your program, but it's very difficult to implement on a large scale, like high density apple orchards and 50 acres or more. I don't believe that the labor is there to be able to do it. But I think the mummies that Kari mentioned, I think that the growers need to train their pruning crews to recognize when the mummies occur, to try to prune them out, drop them on the ground, as Kari mentioned, to degrade as much as possible, and as fast as possible. But in terms of the bitter rot, there's just too many infection sources. These fungi that cause the bitter rot, as Philip's thesis, showed, is that they dwell in the woodlots. So asymptomatically inside of the forest trees, we don't really know exactly what is the amount of inoculum that is being provided. But from anecdotal data from Dave Rosenberger, his 40 years of experience, and other pathologists, Keith Yoder, that the data always shows that growers have more issues with bitter rot closer to the woodlots. So it seems the inoculum is definitely seeping through there. And if you do go more down south on the more southern latitudes, there is a strong belief that the Colotetracum species can also form ascospores, the same way how apple scab fungus does. So not only do they have conidia as asexual spores that cause infection, but they also might have ascospores. It's just that we have not done much research figuring that out. But it is definitely known in Brazil, Uruguay, and other countries that they have early defoliation, and in most of the cases, this is a sign to the fact that the early infections in spring can happen from the ascospores that are being released.
And another thing I think to emphasize, just to sort of continue what Srdjan says. Like, I don't think we'll ever be able to completely eliminate pathogens. The goal is to reduce the pathogen load. And also, I just wanted to point out urea is not the only option. If you use any kind of ammonium-based source nitrogen, that will be just as effective. So if you can't get your hands on feed-grade urea, if it's ammonium-based, you should be good to go. But yeah, that was the only little bits that I wanted just to add.
We have a
Excellent.
question from
Christy,
Christy.
do you want to unmute Christy or?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I just didn't want to interrupt. Thanks for this. The conversation's been really great. I mean, Canada, we've been dealing with the loss of mancozeb and Captan, or restrictions on them for a couple years now. So we have been struggling for solutions. And so, I mean, I don't want to see US going through this, but it's also nice to be able to get a little bit more information too to help us kind of find some options. But what I did want, I've got kind of two questions when it comes to sanitation. So Janet, I agree with you in terms of the pushback in terms of urea use. One of the biggest pushbacks that we get is the impact that a dormant applied urea has on the nitrogen load for the next year, and how they then adjust their fertilizer program. So, I mean, I am not a physiologist to understand how a fall applied urea would, does it break down? Is it still present by the time the tree is ready to start pulling it up? Like, does anyone have any information in terms of really what is the direct impact? And is that negative or positive? And then the other question too, Kari, just to kind of add to, some alternatives to urea. Some growers are starting to consider oxidate as an application. I have some concerns just in terms of its residues and how quickly that would break down. I'm not really sure how that would work in the best timing, but there's some growers that are interested in that. So I'm not sure if you have any experience.
Oxidate doesn't work. I hate to say it, but it doesn't. And I even had a trial one year where I substituted oxidate for mancozeb to see if it could be a substitute, and it's not. It is a sterilant, so it's just going to kill whatever's there in the moment. So there's not going to be any, as far as any work that's going to be happening as a result of the presence of that there. So it's just going to work in the moment, and that's it. So it's not a cheap product. So I would say use it with caution, just because I'm not sure you're going to get the efficacy from it, as an alternative. Another thing I know, I mean, it's considered organic because it's sulfur. Lime sulfur is a very good cleaning things up, especially especially when it comes to bacterial canker on cherries. So there was someone out in Oregon who did some work because we struggle with some bacterial canker out here in Pennsylvania, and he said all you need is 10% lime sulfur in the fall. When it's 70 degrees in September, it burns the leaves off and it gets rid of the bacteria, or at least knocks it back down for the coming season. And he swore by that. And so, it is nasty. That is a nasty product. It is organic, but it is a nasty product. But that is also another alternative for cleaning things up in the fall. So, what effect, again, no research on apple. I just know about cherry and bacterial canker. But going back to so the nitrogen load. So this triggered as I was listening to you. Jim Shoup worked in the Hudson Valley Cornell lab there for a period of time, and he and someone else there had done some work on fall applications of urea, and at least for hardiness, winter hardiness, it didn't have an impact, because I always added a little paragraph about his advice with regards to fall foliar urea and defoliation on tree hardiness. And they said like 2 sprays of urea at 50 pounds did not affect hardiness. He didn't mention about what happens in the following season, but he wasn't too concerned about the coming season's effects of that fall application. So that was work that he had done at the Hudson Valley Lab. And that is information I've just sort of continued passing on to the growers after he mentioned it to me. So,
Yeah, I don't see also any concerns with that. I listened to Dr. Sharif's recommendations he gives to the growers. And so, Christy, you're basically trying to imply that they are concerned about investing money in it, right? They're giving more money, if they're doing this, right?
That they're spending more money, as well as that it's how do they then offset their nitrogen that they're
Mhm.
applying then the following year? Is there going to be
Sure.
any sort of interference, right? Or does it, how
well, the
much does it
question is, do they
contribute to the
have to
load?
add nitrogen? Are they doing soil tests and leaf tests? So
Right.
again, going back to the ecological aspect of things, growers should be doing regular soil and leaf tests, not just soil tests, but also that leaf test in the middle of the summer. So that may be the first place to start, is to determine, is nitrogen even necessary? Like, are they just applying it blindly, just thinking they have to, or maybe they don't have to?
Yeah,
Right.
good, really good point.
Mhm.
There's another
I,
question came. Oh, maybe a comment. Dr. Greg
I
Lang.
just
Go ahead. Sorry.
just to follow up on Christie's comment, I think the discussion around nitrogen is that possibly you're putting too much nitrogen in your trees and it will affect your coloring, maturity, that type of thing. And once you get extra nitrogen in trees, it's really difficult to get it out. It takes several years. So
So
that's
this
that's been a discussion.
Right. So this all goes back to making sure, I think, people need to be doing regular soil and leaf analysis to determine where they stand. So maybe urea is not an option for them to do as far as applications in the fall to break down material. Maybe they should try mowing or something else. So I think it all goes back to just the basics of finding, like, what is actually there, what's in the bank, what's in the soil, and then what's being pulled up from that bank. And that's where, the leaves will tell the story.
Yeah, but we also have to mention something else. What is the really aim with adding the nitrogen? So to be able to the idea of adding nitrogen for specifically, apple scab, and then as well as the other pathogens sanitation, is the idea is that you're providing a food source for microorganisms as well as the fauna, such as the snails and the earthworms. You're providing the food so they can degrade the leaf litter better. So basically, what I'm trying to say is I really don't know much about cycling of the nitrogen in the orchard, but I think that the idea there is that this nitrogen is not intended for the plant primarily, but it's mostly for as a nitrogen source for the degrading capacity of the organisms in the orchard.
There was also a comment in the chat if you guys want to check it out. Nikki Rothwell mentioned, let me scroll back up, and said some work on foliar applications in the fall of nitrogen before senescence in cherries, sweet and tart cherries, and that it improved hardiness. So just kind of a side comment about the nitrogen applications. And so there's also a link in there if you guys want to check that out. We have about 10 minutes left, so I don't know if anybody else has questions or comments about sanitation, or if you want to pivot the conversation in a different direction for the last 10 minutes.
Well, I was wondering if you'd want to go back to sort of the biofungicide products and maybe just quickly wrap up with, like, my experiences, surgeons' experiences, anyone else's experiences with certain products. And I will say, like, when I talk about stuff, I'm going to talk about stuff in a rotational program. By themselves, they come up weak, but when they're rotated, this is when I see them sort of, they've got potential. So I don't know if that's something people would
That
want to
was
cover,
going to be my
discuss.
next question.
Okay.
So perfect. Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you. If you want to go ahead then.
Okay, so I wrote down some notes as far as some things I've worked on over the last couple years. So Eco Swing I've worked on for a number of years. This is a Gowan product. It's a plant extract. I've looked at it by itself and also rotating. Thea, Theia, for those if you want to know how it's spelled. I think Certis has the product. Lifeguard, this has been around a long time, in a combination of double nickel and quava. And then finally, Howler. Howler is the Pseudomonas chloraphis, which I am very, very excited about. So personally, we've looked at Howler by itself in the lab on detached fruit, and I've liked it. It's shown some efficacy to control blue mold, so a possible post-harvest tool for controlling post-harvest diseases. Another one is when I've looked at howler rotating in the field, it was when it was rotated in a conventional system, it was equal to a conventional system all season long. So it suppressed scab, it suppressed Marsanina, sooty blotch fly speck. And I will say those can be two tricky diseases because sometimes the biologicals, they may work against one but not the other. So again, moderate year, not an extreme year where it's raining 1 to 2 inches a week for 3 months. A moderate year. So that's when I've seen howler work. Same with Eco Swing. I really like Eco Swing. By itself, no go. But when it's rotated, this is where I think it shines. Especially if you can start it early in the season. I like to see it when it's like around pink and then rotating it, every other spray. I will say by itself, it's a really good powdery mildew control tool. But once you stop using it, powdery mildew comes in. So it's one of those kind of biologicals, and as far as it only works when it's there. And the same story as I mentioned for both Howler and EcoSwing. Thea was a little bit weaker when it was a tool to rotate, but in a moderate year, it did okay. Same with Lifeguard, which I was surprised about. And then as far as double nickel and Quava. And someone, so expensive. Yeah, I don't know what the costs of these products are. So this is something that I should probably look into before I start chatting, flap my jaws about it. But as far as the price per acre or price per ounce or fluid ounce for them, this I'm not quite sure and how that is equivalent to the conventionals. So that's for the early season diseases. I would say there's definitely some promise in rotating those products. And for bitter rot, it's a different story. I haven't really found or haven't really identified any alternative that is good for bitter rot. Captan has to be in the mix significantly for that. And so maybe Srdjan has had a little more experience, but we've looked at chitosan, I've looked at yeast, I've looked at regalia, and none of them really suppress it enough. It just kind of eats right through it. But I will say, as far as speaking of rots, brown rot, I've had questions from the plain community a lot of looking for organic tools for brown rot on stone fruit. Surprisingly, Serenade ASO at 4 quarts to the acre looks very, very promising. I was pleasantly surprised by its efficacy with suppressing brown rot. Again, moderate year, nothing too extreme. So low moderate year, this is when I think we can get away with some of these products. So this was a quick look-see, and someone asked me about publication reference. I'm working on that as we speak to get that out. But I'm very happy to sort of share with you my reports that I've provided to the chemical companies. Just send me an email, kap22@psu.edu. But that's my sort of broad overview of some of these products. But one thing I do want to say, lastly, just for my last take-home message, Alternaria is becoming a big problem. And I think it's going to be probably one of our more important problems as time wears on, and it's around all season long. And it's very, very tough to control conventionally. So even the FRAC 11s don't work against Alternaria. So, but Alternaria is definitely another one of these pathogens that we're looking at with alternatives. And I can't remember if I mentioned it, but thyme oil, these essential oils are showing some interesting promise. There's potential. Thyme oil and cinnamon oil. Cinnamon oil is another one that shows some very interesting potential. And cinnamon oil may be slightly more potent than I think than thyme oil. So that's sort of the broad brushstrokes. Don't get me started about fire blight. I haven't really found anything with fire blight, but for fungal diseases, there's a little more promise, I think, with some of these biologicals to be able to suppress them. And Mike, that question about cost, that is something that we need to look into a little more closely. I need to find an economist to sort of help me drill that down. But anyway,
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Carrie. That was a great,
a very fast 5 minutes.
but
So
very thorough. Yeah, wonderful. I really appreciate that. What do you have to add on there, Srdjan?
I was going to say, I want to echo what Kari mentioned about the rotational application of these materials. I'm a big believer in that and based on her research, but I was going to say I haven't gotten to a stage where I would be able to rotate some of these materials. And the way how we test is we take one active ingredient and we use that one active ingredient as a spray program throughout the summer to see how it works. And what we found is exactly what Kari mentioned. Like, for instance, Tidal Grow Spectra, which is a chitosan-based material, worked really well in a dry year. So in a year with less amount of rain per rain event, less frequency of rain, it works really good against bitter rot by itself. But when you have a wet year, that efficacy vanishes. So what I was going to basically try to say with this is that if we tried to use it in a spray program and rotating with other synthetic materials, is something I would like to see the efficacy there, and I think it would be able to hold the fort against the disease. I love Bordeaux mix as well. A low rate Bordeaux mix has been giving us some good results. It has been something that we tried for 1 year. It is not excellent, but it is giving certain level of control that could be good in a rotation. We used the one that is the weakest, 2450 Bordeaux mix. And the reason why is because we found an old publication from 1920 something where they recommended it for bitter rot control. And the reason why I took the lowest rate Bordeaux mix is because it would be the least russet, russet causing rate. So these materials, including howler and thea that Kari mentioned, we looked at them as well. They work better against bitter rot when you apply them on a 7 to 10 day schedule. They give about 50% control. So they're not going to be your extra silver bullet solution. But I think in rotation with other materials, they could find a good spot somewhere in a drier part of the year. What else? We have found that out of the synthetic materials, we looked at also glomerular spot. So we're not looking at the bitter rot only from that perspective, but we looked at also glomerular spot, and that is quite difficult problem to tackle. But we found that Topsin seems to be a good material. That's a synthetic material, not an organic. It seems to be helping a lot manage this issue. We have seen Kenja work relatively okay, which is an SDHI fungicide, and also Tidal Grow Spectra. We have seen some efficacy with that material as well. So bitter rot, as Kari mentioned, is a really tough nut to crack. So yeah, I don't have much to tell you about it, but it's just not as successful for other diseases. But we have some contenders that could be okay.
All right.
it keeps us in business.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what we wanted. Well, thank you guys both so much. I actually have a flight to catch, so I'm gonna hop off right now. I think Mike Bezow is gonna stick around if anybody has any last final questions in the last minute. But before I jump off, just want to say thank you so much to both Kari and Srdjan. This has been super helpful. I've been scribbling down notes, and I really appreciate your time and expertise.
Thank you, Janet.
Yep, thank you.
Right. I'm gonna go hopefully not miss my flight.